Some cried and begged for one last hug from their mothers. Others smiled, flipped off cameras, and showed absolutely no remorse. These are killer kids facing life sentences, and their reactions in court reveal something truly disturbing about the human capacity for violence. 1. Lionel Tate. This is Lionel Tate, who became the youngest person in modern American history to be sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tate was 12 years old on July 28, 1999, when he killed 6-year-old Tiffany Unick in his home in Pembroke Park, Florida. That evening, Tate's mother, Kathleen, agreed to watch Tiffany. After dinner, she sent the children downstairs to watch television. About 45 minutes later, Tate came upstairs and told his mother that Tiffany wasn't breathing. The 166-pound Tate had beaten the 48-pound girl so severely that an autopsy revealed a fractured skull, lacerated liver, broken rib, and more than 30 internal bruises. Tate claimed it was an accident, saying they were imitating professional wrestling moves from WCW Thunder. Prosecutors charged Tate with first-degree murder as an adult and offered a plea deal: 3 years in juvenile detention, 1 year house arrest, and 10 years probation. Tate's mother and attorney turned it down, believing they could win an acquittal. In January 2001, the jury found Tate guilty of first-degree felony murder. Florida law mandated life without parole. On March 9, 2001, Judge Joel Lazarus held the sentencing hearing. Tate was now 14. Judge Lazarus called the acts cold, callous, and indescribably cruel before announcing the sentence. When the life sentence was announced, tears rolled down Tate's cheeks. As he was being handcuffed, Tate's mother jumped from her seat and rushed toward him. Some supporters in the courtroom began wailing. Tate attempted to read a prepared statement but couldn't finish after he started crying. His attorney fought back tears as he finished the statement. As guards prepared to escort him out, Tate made one final plea. "Can I please hug my mum before I go?" he asked through his tears. The request was denied. While being led away, Tate looked back at his mother and told her he loved her. In 2004, an appeals court overturned his conviction because his mental competency was never evaluated. He was released on probation, but violated it in 2006 by committing armed robbery. He was sentenced to 30 years and is currently at Everglades Correctional Institution. He'll be eligible for release on September 16, 2030 at age 43. While Tate cried when receiving his sentence, some teens react completely differently in court. 2. Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Pape. These are Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Pape, two 13-year-old best friends convicted of murdering Barbeau's great-grandmother. On September 17, 2012, 78-year-old Barbara Olson was at home in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, when someone entered through an unlocked garage door. It was her own great-grandson, Antonio Barbeau, along with his best friend Nathan Pape. Both were 13. Olson discovered them and invited them inside. The boys followed her in, then attacked her with a hatchet and hammer, striking her repeatedly as she begged for her life. A medical examiner testified Olson suffered at least 18 blows to the head. After killing her, they ransacked the house and stole money, which they used to buy marijuana and pizza. Prosecutors charged both boys as adults with first-degree intentional homicide. Barbeau pleaded no contest in June 2013 and agreed to testify against Pape. Pape went to trial and was found guilty after just a few hours of deliberation. Barbeau was sentenced first on August 12, 2013. He was now 14. Several family members asked for leniency, blaming a head injury from when Barbeau was struck by a car at age 10. Circuit Court Judge Timothy Van Akkeren said, "In my 24 years on the bench, I've not seen anything of this nature, not even close." Barbeau attempted to read a statement apologizing and asking for forgiveness, but he couldn't finish after he started crying. He received life with eligibility for parole on November 24, 2048, when he would be 50. The next day, Pape faced sentencing. Pape gave a short apology. Judge Van Akkeren sentenced Pape to life with parole eligibility on December 2, 2043, when he would be 45. Both teenagers shed tears as their sentences were read. But what about teens who showed zero remorse after committing murder? 3. Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero. These are Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero, a teenage couple who murdered Sierra's father and bragged about it on video. Sierra was 16 and Aaron was 18 when they began dating in June 2020. Sierra's father, 45-year-old Daniel Halseth, disapproved and tried to keep them apart. On April 9, 2021, Sierra and Aaron went to Daniel's home in Las Vegas and stabbed him over 70 times. After he was dead, they mutilated his body with a saw, stuffed it into a sleeping bag, and set it on fire in the garage. They used his credit card and stole his car. 2 days later, Daniel's landlord found his burned body after his mother reported she hadn't heard from him. During the investigation, detectives found text messages sent to Sierra asking about her father. "His phone has been acting up, but he's okay. It should be all fixed by tomorrow night. No worries," Sierra replied after her father was already dead. Surveillance footage showed the teens purchasing bleach, lighter fluid, a circular saw, and disposable gloves before the murder. Then police discovered something shocking. Sierra and Aaron had recorded a video 3 days after killing Daniel. Police arrested them in Salt Lake City on April 13th. In May 2022, both pleaded guilty to 9 counts, including murder with a deadly weapon, first-degree arson, and robbery, to avoid the death penalty. The sentencing hearing took place on October 20th, 2022. Daniel's sister and brother gave emotional statements, while photos of him were displayed on poster boards. Sierra and Aaron both read statements with their attorneys standing beside them. Judge Tierra Jones sentenced both to life in prison with parole possible after 22 years. Photos from the hearing show Sierra and Aaron sitting together, showing little emotion, as victim impact statements were read. After the sentences were announced, Sierra was led out in shackles. Sierra is at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center. Aaron is at High Desert State Prison. Both will be eligible for parole in 2043. 4. Sandell Jackson. This is Sandell Jackson, convicted of murdering a college student during an attempted robbery. Jackson was 19 years old when he murdered 21-year-old Nathan Potter, a University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee film student, on July 7, 2009. Potter was walking to his apartment when Jackson and an accomplice attacked and shot him during a robbery. The trial took place in February 2010. Throughout the proceedings, Jackson showed no remorse. During the verdict reading, Jackson turned toward Potter's family and mouthed insults at them. On April 16, 2010, came the sentencing hearing at Milwaukee County Circuit Court. The judge sentenced Jackson to life in prison without parole. When the sentence was announced, Jackson's reaction was immediate and violent. He became enraged, glaring at the victim's family before cursing loudly in the courtroom. 3 deputies rushed toward him as he grew more aggressive. Jackson began thrashing and fighting against the officers. Deputies had to tackle him to the ground and use pepper spray to subdue him. While officers wrestled Jackson to the floor, his family turned toward Potter's family and began screaming. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Jackson continued to struggle against the deputies. Even after being restrained, he kept cursing at the judge and Potter's family. Jackson is currently incarcerated in Wisconsin and will never be eligible for parole. 5. Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale. These are Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale, 2 teenagers who murdered their Spanish teacher over a bad grade. Both were 16 when they killed 66-year-old Nohema Graber on November 2, 2021, in Fairfield, Iowa. Miller was struggling in Graber's class and believed a poor grade would interfere with his plans to study abroad. He recruited Goodale to help kill her. For 2 weeks, they planned the murder. They surveilled Graber, gathered supplies, including a baseball bat and wheelbarrow, and waited for her at the park where she took daily walks. Miller struck her from behind with the bat, then Goodale hit her multiple times. They hid her body under a tarp, wheelbarrow, and railroad ties. Both were charged as adults with first-degree murder and pleaded guilty in April 2023. Miller was sentenced first on July 6th. Before sentencing, he apologized to Graber's family. Judge Sean Showers sentenced him to life with parole eligibility after 35 years. Goodale's sentencing took place on November 14th and 15th. Judge Showers noted Goodale was remorseful but said he could have stopped the killing. Goodale received life with parole eligibility after 25 years. 6. Dylan Roof. This is Dylan Roof, a white supremacist who murdered 9 black churchgoers in Charleston, South Carolina. Roof was 21 on June 17, 2015, when he entered Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church during Bible study. The parishioners welcomed him, handing him a Bible and study materials. For 45 minutes, Roof worshipped with them. As they stood and closed their eyes for prayer, Roof opened fire, killing 9 people in the racially motivated hate crime. The trial began in December 2016. On December 15th, the jury found Roof guilty on all 33 federal counts after about 2 hours of deliberation. Roof chose to represent himself during sentencing because he didn't want his attorneys presenting evidence about his mental illness. During his closing argument, Roof spoke from a podium. "Anyone who thinks I am filled with hate has no idea what real hate is," he said. On January 10th, 2017, the jury unanimously sentenced Roof to death on all 18 capital counts. The formal sentencing hearing took place the next day. Family members of the victims addressed Roof. Several tried to make eye contact with him, but Roof refused to look at them. Dylan, I know you can hear me," said Janet Scott, one victim's aunt, trying to get his attention. Roof had indicated he wanted to speak, but remained silent. He showed no emotion as the death sentence was formally announced. Roof is currently on federal death row in Terre Haute, Indiana. He remains the first person sentenced to death for federal hate crimes. 7. Krista Pike. This is Krista Gale Pike, a convicted murderer sentenced to death at age 20. 18-year-old Pike attended the Job Corps Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, a program for troubled youth. So did 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer. Pike believed Slemmer was interested in her boyfriend, Tadderall Shipp, who was 17. On the night of January 12, 1995, Pike lured Slemmer to an isolated area on the University of Tennessee agricultural campus. Shipp and another student, Shadola Peterson, came along. What happened next was brutal. Pike and Shipp beat Slemmer repeatedly, kicking her face and slamming her head against concrete. When Slemmer tried to escape, they dragged her back. Pike used a box cutter to slash Slemmer's throat and body before hitting her over the head with a large piece of asphalt. She carved a pentagram into Slemmer's chest, then took a piece of her skull as a trophy. The next morning, a groundskeeper found the body. She told another student she kept the skull fragment in her jacket pocket and even had it with her while eating breakfast. Police recovered it during her arrest. Prosecutors charged Pike and Shipp with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Peterson turned witness for the state and got probation. Since Shipp was 17, he faced life without parole. Pike, however, was 18, which meant prosecutors could seek the death penalty. A jury deliberated for just a few hours on March 22, 1996, before finding Pike guilty on both counts. 8 days later came sentencing. Pike received death by electrocution for the murder charge plus 25 years for conspiracy. When the death sentence was announced, Pike broke down crying. Footage from the courtroom shows her sobbing as she made one final plea. "Can I please hug my mom before I go?" she asked, through tears. The request was denied. As guards prepared to escort her out, Pike looked at her mother and said she loved her. Pike became the youngest woman sentenced to death in the United States during the post-Furman period. Shipp received life with parole eligibility, along with a consecutive 25-year sentence in January 1997. But Pike's violent behavior didn't stop. In 2003, she attacked another inmate and got convicted of attempted first-degree murder, adding another 25 years to her sentence. The Tennessee Supreme Court scheduled her execution for September 30, 2026. If carried out, Pike will be the first woman executed by Tennessee in roughly 200 years. But what about a teenager who showed absolutely no emotion when receiving life in prison? 8. Gavon Ramsey. This is Gavon Ramsey, a convicted murderer who was 17 when he killed his elderly neighbor. Ramsey was an 11th grader at Wadsworth High School in Ohio. He lived just 5 doors down from 98-year-old Margaret Douglas on Portage Street. Between 2 and 4 in the morning on April 6, 2018, Ramsey entered Douglas's home through an unlocked door. Douglas was asleep on her couch. Before attacking her, Ramsey took photos of the sleeping woman. He then strangled her to death and photographed her body in different positions. After killing Douglas, Ramsey hid her corpse in a small hallway closet and covered it with clothes and other items. He only left because he knew his parents would be waking up for work soon. Douglas was reported missing 3 days later. When relatives checked her house on April 9th, they found her body stuffed underneath a pile of clothes and a vacuum inside the closet. Police found the evidence on Ramsey's cell phone during an unrelated investigation. The photos and videos of Douglas were still there. Her wallet was sitting in his bedroom. Prosecutors called these items trophies, comparing Ramsey to a serial killer. Detectives also discovered a journal where Ramsey had written out fantasies about strangling people. Authorities arrested Ramsey and hit him with 9 counts, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, aggravated burglary, and gross abuse of a corpse. Because of how serious the charges were, Ramsey was tried as an adult. He pleaded no contest in November 2018. The sentencing hearing lasted almost 5 hours. 7 witnesses testified, including a forensic psychologist, corrections officials, and Ramsey's own parents. His mother tried to explain away his actions, blaming misprescribed medication. His father sat in the back of the courtroom, wiping tears from his eyes. Under Supreme Court precedent, judges can only sentence a juvenile to life without parole if they find the offender is irreparably corrupt and unfit to ever re-enter society. Medina County Judge Joyce Kimbler reviewed all the evidence. On January 3, 2019, she determined Ramsey met that standard. Ramsey had issued an apology before sentencing, but when Judge Kimbler announced her decision, calling his crime depraved, premeditated, and unlike anything the community had seen before, Ramsey showed almost no emotion. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole for aggravated murder, plus 10 years for aggravated burglary, 10 years for kidnapping, and 12 months for abuse of a corpse. All sentences run consecutively. While Ramsey's father wept, the teenager remained stone-faced, barely even showing emotion. Judge Kimbler called him irreparably corrupt and said he was unfit to re-enter society. Ramsey is currently incarcerated at Grafton Correctional Institution in Ohio. His lack of emotion was disturbing, but it doesn't compare to a killer who actually smiled and flipped off cameras during his sentencing. 9. Michael Richard Swanson. This is Michael Richard Swanson, a convicted murderer who killed 2 innocent women on the same night. Swanson was 17 years old and living in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. On November 15, 2010, his parents reported him missing after he fled their home. That night, Swanson drove to Iowa. He put on a ski mask and walked into the Crossroads convenience store in Algona around 9 in the evening. 47-year-old Vicky Bowman Hall was working behind the counter. Swanson demanded cash and cigarettes. Bowman Hall complied with everything he asked. Then Swanson did something chilling. He removed his ski mask, grinned directly at Bowman Hall, and shot her in the face from close range. He later told police he killed her so she couldn't identify him. About 30 minutes later, Swanson drove to Humboldt and entered a Come-and-Go convenience store. 61-year-old Sheila Myers was working there. Myers gave him cash without resistance. Swanson shot her in the face with a .40 caliber Beretta handgun from 2 feet away. He walked out with $31 and some cigarettes. Both women left behind husbands and children. Police arrested Swanson shortly after at a McDonald's in Webster City. During his first court appearance, Swanson smiled at reporters and cameras. In a videotaped interview, investigators watched him calmly describe the murders while smoking cigarettes and sipping soda. He said he felt powerful, that his adrenaline was going good. The video showed Swanson actually smiling and scratching his head when he described the gasping sound Myers made after he shot her. His trial for killing Myers began in June 2011 in Carroll County. The courtroom heard 2 hours of testimony from Swanson's mother, who sobbed as she described 18 years of trying to get help for a son who was never like other kids. She said from birth he never slept and never stopped moving. On June 23rd, the jury took less than an hour to find Swanson guilty of first-degree murder and robbery. When the verdict was read, Swanson grinned and swiveled in his chair. As he was escorted past TV cameras, he extended both middle fingers and smiled. On July 7, 2011, came the sentencing hearing. Judge Thomas Bice called Swanson's crime a cold-blooded murder. Swanson sat there smiling as the judge described what he had done. He kept smiling as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He was still smiling as guards escorted him out of the courtroom. Judge Bice looked directly at Swanson and said, "You're evil. You committed an evil act. You deserve to spend the rest of your life in prison." Later that same day, Swanson was supposed to go on trial for murdering Bowman Hall. Instead, there was a hearing where he pleaded guilty. Bowman Hall's daughter Jillian gave an emotional statement, confronting Swanson directly. She called him a coward and said what he did was truly evil. During this second sentencing, the judge told Swanson to stop smiling. "I wouldn't be smiling at me," Judge David Lester warned him. Swanson received a second life sentence to run consecutively with the first, meaning one follows the other. He also has to pay $150,000 in restitution to the Myers family. In 2013, Governor Terry Branstad commuted Swanson's sentences to 60 years before parole eligibility, following a Supreme Court ruling on juvenile sentences. But Swanson's violent behavior continued behind bars. In November 2014, he attacked another inmate at the Iowa Medical and Classification Center. Swanson and another inmate grabbed the victim and slashed at his neck with a knife fashioned from a razor blade. In November 2015, Swanson pleaded guilty to attempted murder for the prison attack. He got an additional 25 years. Swanson is currently incarcerated at the Iowa Medical and Classification Center. He's eligible for parole in 2090, when he'll be 97 years old. Tenure: Marlin Joseph. This is Marlin Joseph, sentenced to death for killing a mother and her 11-year-old daughter. Joseph was 29 when he murdered Kaladar Crowell and her daughter Kyra Inglet on December 28, 2017, in West Palm Beach, Florida. Joseph lived in the same home as the victims. He became angry over an argument between Kyra and his 8-year-old daughter. Joseph confronted Crowell and shot her multiple times. As she begged for help, he shot her twice in the head. Kyra heard the gunshots and fled. Joseph chased her down the street while his brother tried to intervene. Joseph caught the terrified 11-year-old and shot her 5 times, including 3 times in the head. The jury convicted Joseph on February 24, 2020. In October, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. The sentencing hearing took place on November 19th at Palm Beach County Circuit Court. Crowell's father called Joseph an infectious disease and an absolute evil person in its purest form. "You should be banished from this earth," Kenneth Crowell said. As the death sentence was announced, many family members openly wept in the courtroom. Joseph became the first person in Palm Beach County to be sentenced to death in 18 years. He is currently on death row in Florida.